Today, a driver lost his life at the Nürburgring. Before anything else, condolences to his family. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a race story. It's the exact chain of events that turned a normal start into complete chaos. A 3-place grid penalty that pushed Verstappen into danger. A race that collapsed in less than 30 minutes. 7 cars destroyed in one of the fastest sections of the track. And one critical moment that no one saw coming. Because when the crash happened, Verstappen wasn't even in the car. This isn't about bad luck. It's about how one decision, one position on the grid, and one section of track connected everything. From the penalty, to the crash, to the outcome that stopped the race completely. And the detail that explains all of it is the one almost everyone missed. The mourning didn't feel dangerous. That's what makes everything that followed so difficult to understand. Because there were no warning signs, no tension in the air, no sense that this day would be any different. Verstappen arrived focused, calm, precise. This wasn't about Formula One pressure. This was something personal. The Nürburgring wasn't just another track on the calendar. It was a challenge he had been chasing for a long time. A circuit where drivers don't talk about perfection, because it doesn't exist. Every lap is compromised. Every corner is a guess. And that's exactly what attracted him to it. But before the race even began, something shifted. A decision from the stewards. A penalty. 3 positions lost on the grid after an incident involving his teammate during qualifying. From a strong starting position, down into the pack. And on most circuits, that's manageable. Here, it changes everything. Because at the Nürburgring, where you start defines what you face. Clean air or chaos. And this penalty placed the car directly into the most unpredictable environment possible. Heavy traffic. Multiple categories of cars sharing the same track. Speed differences so extreme that one car can close in on another before the driver even realizes it. This isn't wheel-to-wheel racing in equal machinery. This is survival. And that's the part most people underestimate. The risk doesn't come from pushing too hard. It comes from everything you cannot predict. A slower car braking earlier than expected. A blind corner hiding what's ahead. A gap that disappears in a fraction of a second. Now imagine being forced into that situation from the very start. That's what this penalty did. It didn't just drop positions. It changed the entire nature of the race they were about to run. More overtakes. More exposure. More moments where control slips away. And while all of this was quietly building, Verstappen wasn't even thinking about the opening laps. He was thinking ahead. To the moment he had specifically asked for. The night stint. The most difficult phase of the race. Low visibility. Cold conditions. Instinct over calculation. That was his target. That was the plan. But what makes this even more unsettling is that everything began to unravel long before he ever got the chance to drive. Because the real story of this race didn't start with the crash. It started with positioning. With traffic. With a single decision. That quietly placed the car exactly where the risk was highest. And what happened next wasn't random. It was the moment where all of those factors finally collided. The race began, and for a few moments, everything looked normal. Cars launching off the line. Engines echoing through the forest. But underneath that normality, there was tension building. Because starting in the middle of the pack at the Nürburgring is never stable. It's crowded. Unpredictable. And most importantly, it's blind. Lap 1 felt tight. Not chaotic yet, but close. Cars constantly adjusting. Drivers reacting more than planning. Because here, you're not racing one opponent. You're dealing with traffic from multiple categories. Cars that brake earlier. Cars that accelerate differently. And sometimes, cars that appear out of nowhere. That's the real challenge of this circuit. You don't always see the problem coming. And that's where everything starts to break. Lap 2, still running. The field begins to stretch, but not enough to create space. Because space is a luxury the Nürburgring rarely gives you. And then, lap 3. This is where everything changes. 17:55 local time. Less than half an hour into what was supposed to be a 4-hour race. And suddenly, red flag. Immediate. No hesitation. The race is stopped. And this is the moment where confusion turns into concern. Because a red flag that early, at this circuit, means something serious has happened. Then the first reports begin to surface. A crash. Not a small one. A multi-car collision. 7 cars involved. All in the same section of track. Klostertal. One of the fastest sections on the entire Nordschleife. A place where drivers are fully committed. No lifting. No margin for error. And when something goes wrong there, it doesn't stay contained. It escalates instantly. One car slows. Another arrives too fast. Another has nowhere to go. And within seconds, the track is blocked. Completely blocked. Cars scattered across the racing line. Others thrown beyond the barriers. Debris everywhere. And here's the part that makes this even more critical. Drivers approaching that section would have had almost no time to react. Because at those speeds, you don't process information. You react or you don't. Emergency crews were deployed immediately. Not gradually. All at once. Because this wasn't under control. This was damage limitation. Ambulances on track. Medical teams rushing in. And then, the escalation. The helicopter. That single detail changes the tone completely. Because helicopters are not used unless the situation demands urgency. And while all of this was unfolding, Verstappen was still in the garage, watching the screens. Waiting. Not knowing if his own car had been involved. Not knowing who was caught in that incident. Because in that moment, there were no clear answers. Only fragments. Only uncertainty. And at the Nürburgring, that silence is often the most worrying signal of all. Minutes passed, but nothing changed. No cars moving. No engines restarting. Just silence. And in motorsport, that kind of silence means one thing. This wasn't a simple interruption. This was something far more serious. Race control released very little information. 7 cars involved. Multiple drivers injured. But no details. No names. No conditions. And that absence of information started to feel heavier than any explanation. Because when details are held back, it usually means the situation is still unfolding. And not in a good way. Meanwhile, track marshals remained focused on that same section. Klostertal. Still closed. Still inaccessible. Which raises an important point most people miss. The damage wasn't just to the cars. The track itself had taken a hit. Barriers impacted. Safety systems pushed to their limits. And then, a detail began to circulate quietly. One of the cars had gone under the barrier. That changes everything. Because barriers are designed to stop impact. To absorb energy. To protect the driver at all costs. If a car goes underneath, it means something went very wrong. The angle. The speed. The force. All of it exceeded expectations. And suddenly, this wasn't just a racing incident anymore. It was a critical failure under extreme conditions. Now think about how all of this connects. Heavy traffic. Limited visibility. High speed commitment. And a starting position that forced the car into the middle of it all. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because the crash didn't happen in isolation. It happened in an environment that was already unstable. An environment where timing is everything. Who you encounter. Where you encounter them. And how fast you're closing in. A difference of just a few seconds can completely change the outcome. And that's the part no one can control. So when that penalty pushed the car further back, it didn't just change position. It changed timing. It changed traffic patterns. It changed exposure to risk. And somewhere inside that altered sequence, 7 cars ended up in the same place, at the same moment. Meanwhile, inside the garage, nothing was clear. Drivers watching screens. Teams waiting for confirmation. Because until names are confirmed, everyone fears the same possibility. That someone they know, someone they just raced against minutes earlier, is part of that incident. And this is where the emotional weight truly settles in. Because every driver understands one thing. The risk is always there. Managed, but never gone. Reduced, but never eliminated. And on this day, that reality came back, stronger than anyone expected. But the most difficult part of this story had still not been confirmed. Because what came next is the moment that changed everything. And then, the confirmation came. Not immediately. Not clearly. But slowly, and in the worst possible way. A driver had died. Juha Miettinen. An experienced racer. A regular at the Nürburgring. Someone who understood exactly what this circuit demands, every single lap. And in that moment, everything changed. Because up until then, this was a serious accident. Now, it was a tragedy. The race was over. Not paused. Not delayed. Ended. There was no discussion. No scenario where it could continue. Because when something like this happens, competition stops mattering. Lap times don't matter. Positions don't matter. Nothing does. And this is the side of motorsport that rarely gets shown. The side that drivers carry with them every time they get in the car. The part they accept, but never want to face. Meanwhile, Verstappen was still in the garage. He hadn't driven a single lap. The stint he had planned, the moment he had been waiting for, never came. And that detail feels different now. Because he came to the Nürburgring chasing something pure. A challenge. A dream. A connection with one of the most demanding tracks in the world. But instead, he witnessed its harshest reality. And here's where everything becomes impossible to ignore. Less than a day earlier, he had spoken about the risk. He admitted it was there. He acknowledged that something serious could happen. And he said he was willing to accept it. At the time, those words sounded like confidence, like the mindset of a champion. But now, they carry a different weight. Because the risk wasn't theoretical anymore. It wasn't just part of the sport. It became real. It had a name. It had consequences. The Nürburgring has always been called the Green Hell. Not as a nickname, but as a warning. A place where greatness and danger exist in the same moment. Where every lap asks the same question. How much are you willing to risk? And on this day, that question was answered in the most brutal way possible. The penalty. The traffic. The crash. The silence. And finally, the confirmation. All connected. All part of the same chain. Not isolated moments, but a sequence that built, step by step, until there was no way back. And now, everything feels different. Because the real question isn't just what went wrong. It's whether something like this can ever truly be prevented on a track where risk is part of every single corner.